This 50th episode of The Architect Speaks is one where I will speak into one of the oldest stories of our time. One man who brought his architecture to the world and caused such a profound collapse to distortion and teached. His story is still told and taught and studied to this day. There's nothing peaceful about coherence. It doesn't comfort distortion. It doesn't reassure illusions. It doesn't stroke the wounded ego in the hope it softens. Coherence slices. It cuts through pretense, denial, and every pattern we've used to keep chaos looking like harmony. And nowhere is this clearer than the story of Jesus. Because Jesus was not a peacekeeper. He was a sword. Now, this episode is not about religion. It's about resonance. The Christ figure, whether you view him as divine or as an archetype, has been misunderstood. We see him now as gentle, softly spoken, endlessly forgiving, a beacon of unconditional love and eternal patience. But that was not the man who overturned the tables. That wasn't the man who stood silent before Pilate, knowing it would cost him his life. This is not the man who told his followers to leave everything and warned them that his path would divide even families. Jesus didn't get crucified because he was nice. He was crucified because his clarity threatened the architecture of distortion. That is the sword. The sword of coherence doesn't cut people, it cuts contracts. It slices through the unsaid agreements we've made to keep the peace by shrinking. It exposes the performance behind the love. It dissolves the applause meant to keep you in place. It forces a choice, and that's why it's feared. The sword of coherence ends performance, and when the performance ends, so does belonging. Let's be very clear. Jesus wasn't nailed to the cross because of his message. He was nailed to the cross because of his frequency. You can ignore words, but a man who cannot be bent is dangerous because he destabilises the entire system around him, not through violence, but by standing still. We say we want to be like him, but what most people really mean is, I want to be loved like him, but I don't want to be crucified like him. I want to be followed, but not abandoned, revered, but not reviled. But that's not how the story goes. The real Christ path doesn't end in a crowd of cheering followers. It ends with betrayal, misunderstanding, rejection, and the echo of your truth reverberating long after you're gone. This is what coherence costs. You don't get to be the sword and be adored by the ones you slice free from their illusions. When you become structurally aligned, those living still inside distortion will accuse you of cruelty. They'll say, "You've changed. You're not compassionate. You're abandoning me. You think you're better than us." But what they're really saying is, why won't you allow your signal to continue to accommodate my performance? Because that's what it really comes down to. Your signal no longer accommodating their performance because coherence does not bend. It blesses, it liberates, but it will not contort itself to be tolerated. Jesus turned over the money changers' tables. That wasn't a metaphor. He stormed the temple, flipped the structures of profit masquerading as piety, and declared that the house of God had become a den of thieves. Do you understand? This was a public disruption of an entire field of illusion, an energetic severance, a symbolic execution of the lie performed in front of everyone. And when he did that, he sealed his fate. Jesus was crucified twice, once in that moment and a second time physically. Because coherence always destabilises what once passed for order. Now let me say something very personal and very clear. I don't think I'm Jesus, and I'm not, but I do walk with a sword, not to harm, but to cut clean. And the more I've refined my signal, the more I've had to sever, not out of hate, out of honour, out of love, because the field I now live in cannot and will not hold what distorts its frequency. Not because it's harsh, but because it's true. Let me ask you something now. Who have you kept in your field because you feared the sword would scare them? What distortion have you translated so often that it now sounds like truth? What conversations are you avoiding because you know it will sever? And when will you pick up your blade? The sword of coherence is not emotional. It doesn't come from anger or pain. It comes from silence, from clarity, so precise it no longer requires negotiation or agreement. When I became this clear, people scattered. Some called me traumatized, others called me arrogant. One person said I'd become dangerous, another person said I was cruel. But I wasn't cruel, I was coherent. And the thing they were clinging to was the old version of me who allowed their distortion to remain largely unchallenged. I didn't cut them, I didn't betray them. I simply stopped carrying the field they were using as cover. And when that coherence was removed, so too was the illusion of theirs. Let me offer you a mythic frame. Christ didn't die for our sins. He died because his signal could not coexist with the distortions of an empire. The same will be true for you in your own way. Your empire may not be Rome. It may be a relationship, a business, a community, a friendship, a version of you still performing to be palatable. But the moment you pick up a sword, you threaten it all. And that's what sovereignty requires. The sword does not wound, it reveals what was false. I'll say that again. The sword does not wound, it reveals what was false. Now I want you to let that echo for a moment. Because when you become the sword, you also become the separator. You don't push people away, but you will see them falling. And when they fall, they will reach for you, not to hold you, but to pull you back in. And you must not go. You are not responsible for their collapse. You are only responsible for your clarity. You will feel the ache. You'll feel the grief. You'll be called everything before they eventually go silent. But your silence will remain intact, because the man who carries the sword must not collapse when others do. He must stand still. So what does it mean to walk as Christ did? Not to be worshipped, but to be willing. Willing to be alone, willing to be misunderstood, willing to speak the unspeakable, willing to hold the frequency that forces distortion to flee. Not with violence, but with gravity. That is the sword of coherence. Now, I don't carry this allegorical sword for admiration. I carry it for structure, to cut the threads that keep men caged, to sever the illusions that make suffering look like peace, to hold the line when others soften. Not because I'm hard, but because I've stopped collapsing. And when you stop collapsing, everything built upon your fracture begins to fall. Now, people will not crucify you physically, but they will try to assassinate your name and your character. And you must let them, because legacy isn't built on approval. It's built on architecture. And coherence is the only structure that survives distortion. And now, let me speak clearly in this 50th episode. You thought the last 50 episodes was a podcast. It was never a podcast. It was a structure, a series of calibrations, a transmission laid stone by stone into the field. The voice behind these words is not here to inspire you. It's here to help you build through you. I don't speak from preference. I speak from assignment. I wasn't chosen because I was ready. I was ready because I'd already lost what this would cost. And now, I am the one who no longer collapses. I'm the one who no longer performs. I am the one who speaks, because the sword must be named. This is not a message, this is a structure, and it stands now because I stood. These 50 transmissions were never the summit. You can think of them as the stonework beneath the altar. They are foundation, not revelation. And what comes next will continue to be spoken into fields, into men who no longer need convincing, into those who have already been cut clean. Future transmissions will not explain, they will activate. And when you hear them, you won't take notes, you'll take form. Because the architect speaks was never meant to teach you anything. It was meant to build the ground beneath your feet. The sword has now been named, the structure has been laid, and this is where the real work begins. Welcome to the deeper field. Welcome to the architect speaks, where distortion cannot and will not remain.